Hello everyone, in today's video we will build an application in which you can sign in and create an account using an email, and you can also log in by using the Google account. So let's jump into Firebase console and let's create a project. So my project name is Auth course, and let's continue, disable this, wait a couple of seconds until it finishes. Now let's add our application here. So click on Android, go into Android Studio and open the build integrator from the app module and copy the namespace and paste it here. Now let's register the application. Now let's download the file. Now let's add the file here. So switch to project view, open app, and here in the folder where is the source, we need to drag it here. Then let's hit next. Make sure that you add these dependencies. So let's go into Android view in the project, paste it here. Now let's copy this one and add it in the app build.gradle and Firebase BOM. Now hit next and continue to console. And now we need to set up the email authentication. So let's say authentication and get started. Hit email password and enable it, save. And now we are able to create accounts by using the email. We need to add one more dependency here to create the account, the Firebase Auth, so sync now. Now let's go into main activity and let's delete these functions. And now we can start to build the authentication manager. So let's say class authentication manager. And now let's say private vol auth, and this is firebase.auth. Now let's start with the first function, and this will be to create an account. So let's say create account with email, and now we need to say email is string and password string 2. Now let's open the curly brackets, and now we need to say create user with email and password. Say email and password because these are the parameters required by this function. Now let's say add on complete listener, and this returns a task, and we can simply check if task is successful, otherwise handle the case. And now let's say that you want to return a value when the user is created. So if you want to do that, we need to make this return a flow, but we need a type of flow, and we will have two cases here, one with an authenticated and one with error. So let's say interface, and this is auth response, and this will be I think it's fine, but this is a data object with success and one with error. Okay, now let's return the auth response, and we are using a callback flow. So callback flow, because this one can be used to return values from the add-on complete listener, because we can't return values from here. So we can simply say try send auth response dot success, and we need to say error and let's say message task dot exception message, and let's put an empty message let's put an empty message. Now if we want to authenticate a user, we need to do almost the same thing, but we are using a different function. So let's say login with email string password, and the same response, auth response, and we are using the callback flow and auth sign in with email and password and pass the values email, password. And we are doing the same thing here. Add on complete listener, get a task, and let Gemini autocomplete this. And this is how we can create and sign in a user. Now, in order to set up Google Authentication, you need to go into Build a Gradle from the app module and make sure that you have the Firebase Auth added and the Credentials Manager and also the Google ID. And the Firebase documentation about that is quite old, because in the next API level, that way will be deprecated and we need to use... Okay, so if you want to implement Google Authentication using Firebase, if you want to implement the Google Authentication, you need to add the Firebase Auth dependency, the Credentials Manager, and Google ID. We are using Credentials Manager because the old way with begin sign in with Google or something will be deprecated in API 35 and the documentation won't be up to date. So now I'm back on the authentication panel of the Firebase. Add a new provider, use Google, and yeah, that's okay. Let's scroll and hit save. Now let's hit done, and we need to download again the services JSON because we added the Google sign-in. I won't add the certificate fingerprint here because I will add it in the Google console, because when I'm using Credential Manager, I tried to use the Firebase Web Client ID and to add the fingerprint here, and it didn't work. And we can get the credentials through the client ID created in the Google console, and we can pass it here to create a new account here. Okay, so we are on the Google Cloud console, and hit APIs and services and make sure that you click on credentials. And now we need to create an Auth client ID. So let's click on it, and we need to pass Android. I will let it as it is. I need a package name, and I can find it in the namespace. Paste it here. Now, in order to get the certificate fingerprint, you need to go into Android Studio, in Gradle, and in the sign-in report, and double-click on it, and you will have an certificate fingerprint. But if you can't see the sign-in report and the other files, you need to click on this, Gradle settings, go to experimental, and make sure that you have this one checked, and this will generate all the files. So make sure that you double click on this, and wait a second, and this is my certificate, and let's paste it here, and let's create the Auth client. Now we need to copy this email, and we need to create a new string file. String value, in the strings.xml, and this will be called web client ID, and paste it here. Now we need to create a nonce in order to create a sign-in request to Google. Basically, a nonce is an ID that is encrypted using an encryption algorithm. So let's say fun create nonce, and this will return a string. Now let's say raw nonce is equal to UID dot random UID to string, and now we need to convert this to a byte array. So bytes is equal to raw nonce to byte array, and now we need to mention the encryption algorithm, and this is called MD message digest, and we need to say get instance and pass the algorithm, which is this one, and digest is equal to MD dot digest, and we need to pass the bytes here. And the last thing we need to do is to return digest.fold, and we need to open the curly brackets, and That's it. Let's remove this one and let's put this on a new line. Now let's create the function. So let's say sign in with Google, open the curly brackets, and let's also return a flow here that is of type auth response and open the callback flow. Now we need to create a Google ID option that will give us the user Google ID. So let's say, well, Google ID option is equal to get Google ID option dot builder, and let's put this on a new line and let's say set filter account by authorized accounts false. And now we can pass the server, the web client ID. So let's say set server client ID, and we need to receive a context. So let's put this as a parameter to the class context, and we can use it here. Context gets string and web client ID. So if you don't want to auto select an account, you can say false. And now we need to set the nonce, set nonce, create nonce, and simply call .build. Now in order to create the request, we need to use the get credential request. So let's say request is equal to get credential request dot builder, and now we need to say add credential option, pass the Google ID option and hit build. Okay, and now we need to use the credential manager, and we will check if the sign-in request was made for the Google sign-in, and if yes, we will use the Firebase to sign in the users. So let's say try and cache the exception, and let's say handle. Now let's create the credential manager. So credential manager and create and use the context. Now let's simply say credential manager get credential, pass the context, and we also need to pass the request. So let's add the parameter name here and here, and let's put this on new line. And now let's extract the credentials. So let's say credential is equal to, oh, I forgot to get the credential here. So result, and let's say result dot credential. Now let's check if the credential is a custom credential, and let's open the curly brackets. And now we need to check if the credential dot type is equal to Google ID token credential, type Google ID token credential, open the brackets again. Now we need to open again a try block. So let's say try, and we need to cache this time Google ID token parsing exception, and open the curly brackets here, and let's send an error message here, and let's also handle this here too. Now we need to get a token credential, and this will contain an ID token that will be passed to Firebase. So let's create the Google ID token credential, and this is equal to Google ID token credential, create form, and we need to say credential dot data. And now let's go down here and say Firebase credential, and this is equal to Google Auth provider, and let's say get credential, put this on a new line, and let's say Google ID token credential ID token, and here we pass null. And now the only thing we need to do is to pass the Firebase credential to the Firebase sign-in. So auth sign in with credential and pass the Firebase credential. Now let's say add on complete listener, and let's get the successful and the error message. Now we need to say await close, and I forgot to do the same for the previous functions, so await close and await close, otherwise it will crash. And let's also make the nonce function private. We will build only the login screen, and you can log in with email and with Google. If you want, you can create an extra screen in which you can create an account and then navigate to this one. And let's create the screen, so let's say login screen, and let's also have a preview of it, so login preview. Let's call the authentication course theme, and let's call the login screen here, and let's open the panel in the right, show background true, and let's remove the modifier, and let's also call the function here login screen. For the first thing we need to say column, and let's say modifier fill max size. Now let's have our text fields, so let's say var email by remember mutable state of string, and let's import the required things, duplicate this and rename this with password. Now let's create the headers, so let's say text, and let's say sign in. Let's also add some padding inside, so padding 20 dp, and let's make the text quite bigger, so let's say style, material, theme, typography, display medium for example, and let's also say font weight to bold, and let's also add the subtitles, so let's say display small, and this will say please fill the form to continue, and let's make this a little smaller. Now let's scroll down a little and let's create the first text field, outlined text field, and pass the email. Put this on a new line, on value change, new value, and let's say email equals new value. Now we need to round this, so let's say circle shape, fill the whole size, the whole width, and I think it doesn't look that great if it's fully rounded, so let's say 20 dp, 16 dp, and this is quite nice. Now let's add a placeholder, so let's say placeholder, text, email, and now let's say leading icon, icons, dot rounded, email, and add null here. And now we can go down here and create the password text field. Let's simply duplicate this one and say password, update the passwords here too. The placeholder will be password, and the icon will be lock. Now we can simply, now in order to make the text hidden, we need to say visual transformation, password visual transformation, and let's also add some spacing between those, so we need to use a spacer with a height of 10 dp for example, and let's also add one between the headers and text fields, so let's say height 40 dp, and we can lower the spacing, I think it's too big, and let's center this in the center of the screen, so vertical arrangement center, and we can add a button that says sign in, so button, one click, and let's say sign in, and let's make this text bigger. So let's say font weight, bold, and let's say style, material theme, typography, title, medium. And let's make this fill the whole space, the whole width. Let's make this fill the whole width. So let's say modifier fill max width. Now let's add some padding inside. So modifier padding vertical 60p. I think it's too much. 4dp is okay. And let's add spacing between the text fields. So height 20dp. And now let's add a text that says or continue with, and we can center this by saying box modifier fill max width content alignment center, and put this inside, put arguments on separate lines. Make sure that you add some padding vertical of 12dp, and below this we will create the Google button, and let's say button, and inside we will use an image, painter resource, are drawable, and I already have a Google icon here, and let's put this on separate lines, and content description null. Let's make this outline to look better, so outline button, and we also need to add sign in with Google. Okay, now let's copy the font weight and the style and apply them here, and let's put this on a separate line. Let's decrease the size of the image, so let's say size is equal to 36dp, for example, to see how it looks, and is okay. Let's add some space between them, so let's say spacer width, and let's say 6dp, and let's also make the button fill the max width, modifier fill max width. It looks great, and now let's go up here and let's get the authentication manager. So authentication manager is equal to remember, and pass the authentication manager here, and let's also get the context by saying local context.current, and context will be passed here. Now we also need to create a coroutine scope, and let's say remember coroutine scope, and with this we launch a coroutine scope, and we will observe the response that will return from the sign-in request. So let's say authentication manager, login with email, pass the email and password. Now we need to say on each, and on each response we will receive some data. So this response is of type auth response, and we have the success or the error. So if response is auth response.success, for example, do something, and we need to launch this in a coroutine scope, otherwise it won't return any value. And we can do the same for the sign in with Google. So let's say login with email, replace this with sign in with Google. If you're trying this on the emulator, it might not work because you don't have the credentials added on the emulator, so it's better to try this on a real device. I tried on mine and it works perfectly. So that's it, and if you like this video, make sure to subscribe, and I also have a blog on which I'm posting frequently, so make sure to give a follow on that too. So see you in the next video.